Story number 1, Outpost Handoff. I arrived at Station W17 on the morning of January 9, 2024, carrying standard maintenance equipment, and prepared for a routine 14-day rotation handoff. The helicopter set down on the cleared pad at 0900 hours. Sarah Vickers met me at the equipment bay door, dressed in regulation cold weather gear, her face showing the particular kind of tiredness that comes from 2 weeks of solo high-altitude work. The briefing took 4 hours. Vickers walked me through the atmospheric monitoring systems, the satellite uplink procedures, the backup power configurations, and the emergency protocols with methodical precision. Everything appeared standard until we reached the radio transmission logs. She mentioned that the automated broadcast timestamps had been irregular during overnight hours, showing transmissions at times that did not correspond to the programmed schedule. She said it twice, actually. The second time while looking at the log screen, as though she expected it to show something different than it had the first time. I asked if she had filed a technical report. She said she had not, that the transmissions themselves were clean and the equipment passed diagnostics. I made a note to monitor it myself. The helicopter extracted her at 13:30 hours. I watched it disappear over the southern ridge, and then I was alone with the wind and the equipment hum. The first 2 nights were unremarkable. I followed the standard routine, hourly sensor checks, 3 daily satellite reports, equipment maintenance, meal preparation, 6 hours of designated sleep. The station was well designed for isolation, everything within arm's reach, every system labeled and documented. On the 3rd night, I woke at 2:17 in the morning without knowing why. The station was dark. Not the normal darkness of overnight operations with indicator lights and standby screens, but completely dark. I used my flashlight to check the main power panel. Grid power was functional. Solar array showed normal. But all 3 backup battery systems read 0 charge, which was not possible. Those batteries maintained charge independently, with redundant inputs from 3 separate sources. They could not all drain simultaneously under any normal failure condition. I brought the batteries back online and ran full diagnostics. No faults. No error logs. The systems showed they had been functioning normally throughout the night. I checked the charge controllers and verified the solar input from the previous day. Everything indicated the batteries should have been at 90% or above. I filed a maintenance anomaly report via satellite uplink at 0400 hours. The system confirmed transmission. At 0600, I received an automated response from regional operations acknowledging my report and logging it under my credential code. The timestamp on their acknowledgement showed they had received my report at 2200 hours the previous evening, 6 hours before I had sent it. I checked my sent messages folder. There were 2 identical reports. One timestamped 2200 hours on the 3rd, which I had not sent. One timestamped 0400 hours on the 4th, which I had. I did not sleep the remainder of that night. Over the following 4 nights, I maintained detailed personal documentation separate from official logs. The atmospheric sensors recorded pressure readings at negative altitudes on 7 occasions, indicating measurement points below ground level. The emergency beacon activated without trigger events twice, requiring manual reset. The automated weather broadcasts transmitted at irregular intervals that matched no programmed schedule, exactly as Vickers had described. Each time I ran diagnostics, the systems reported normal function. On day 9, I conducted a complete inventory of station documentation, looking for maintenance records that might explain chronic equipment problems. In the filing cabinet beneath the radio desk, I found a handwritten log on weather service stationery. The handwriting was Sarah Vickers. The entries were dated January 12th through January 14th, 3 days after her departure. The content described equipment behaviors identical to what I had been experiencing: battery drains, impossible sensor readings, automated systems operating outside programmed parameters. The entry dated January 14th, written in Vickers' hand, included a sentence I read several times. Incoming technician will need to verify employment records before assuming standard rotation. I violated communication protocol that evening by using the satellite uplink to search personnel databases for Sarah Vickers' assignment history. The final entry referenced previous technician notes that described similar phenomena. I had found no previous technician notes. I searched again, methodically. Every drawer and storage compartment, nothing. Her employment record showed she had worked for the National Weather Service from 2018 to 2022. Separated voluntarily. No disciplinary flags. Her assignment history showed coastal stations in Oregon and Washington. No record of Station W17. No record of any Wind River Range posting. I checked the official station logbook, the one maintained in the equipment bay for continuous documentation across all rotations. My own handwriting filled the recent pages, which was correct. But the entries continued past day 9. I was reading my handwriting describing events I had not experienced, dated through day 14. The entry for day 12 described a complete failure of the primary communications array. The entry for day 13 described visual confirmation of another person inside the station during overnight hours. The entry for day 14 contained a single sentence: complete rotation without further reporting. I did not write those entries. The handwriting was mine. I maintained standard operations. I filed routine reports via satellite uplink. I completed scheduled maintenance. I did not experience a communications array failure on day 12. I did not see another person on day 13. I slept in 4-hour shifts with the interior lights on full. The incoming technician arrived by helicopter at 0900 hours on day 14, January 23rd. His name was Michael Corman, and he was professionally pleasant and appropriately prepared. I conducted the equipment briefing exactly as Vickers had conducted it for me. I did not mention irregular timestamps. I did not mention the battery drain, or the impossible sensor readings, or the logbook entries in my handwriting describing events I had not experienced. I extracted at 13:30 hours. I watched Station W17 disappear behind the ridge, a small gray structure on a white mountain, and I did not look back. My official rotation report was filed as routine upon return to regional operations in Cheyenne. I included standard maintenance notes and equipment performance data. I also transferred an encrypted personal file to Regional Supervisor Denise Carmichael, containing full documentation of all anomalous phenomena. She confirmed receipt by secure message 6 hours later. The message contained no questions and no requests for clarification. It said only, received and logged. 3 days later, I received reassignment orders to coastal monitoring stations in Washington state for a minimum period of 6 months. No explanation was provided. I did not request one. Station W17 remains in active operation. Rotations continue on a 14-day cycle. I have not been assigned to Wind River Range stations again. My personnel file contains no flags, no disciplinary notes, no indication of irregular reporting. The encrypted documentation was archived under restricted access protocols. I was not informed of any investigation or follow-up action. The incident is closed. Story number 2, Pump Station 31. I arrived at Station 7, Delta on the morning of November 12th for the quarterly equipment audit. Standard 3, day rotation covering pressure sensors and telemetry relays across a 40-mile stretch of pipeline. The drive out took just under 2 hours from the regional depot, the last 16 miles on gravel access roads that cut through Calais and scrubland where you might see another vehicle once a week. The station itself sat in a shallow basin, a prefabricated structure with solar panels and a backup generator, surrounded by valve houses and sensor arrays spaced at intervals along the line. The outgoing technician, Harel, was loading his truck when I pulled in. He handed over the keys and the logbook without much conversation, which was typical for these handoffs. Before he left, he mentioned in passing that the motion sensors in the western valve house had been triggering nightly since the previous Thursday, always between 2 and 4 in the morning. He said he had checked the enclosure twice and found nothing, no signs of animal entry, no equipment damage. He logged it as a calibration drift and recommended I keep an eye on it. I told him I would. After Harel drove off, I unloaded my gear and ran through the standard arrival checklist. I tested the radio link to regional dispatch, confirmed generator fuel levels, and reviewed the maintenance schedule. The logbook showed routine entries up until the previous week, then became sparse. Harel had noted the motion alerts, but provided no follow-up data, no thermal imaging records, no secondary confirmation. It was not like him to leave work incomplete, but I assumed he had been pressed for time. I reset the motion detection system and confirmed no wildlife signatures on thermal. The sensors showed green across the board. I spent the rest of the day on calibration work, cycling through the primary monitoring console and checking pressure readings at each relay point. During this process, I noticed several corrupted timestamp entries in the system logs. The corruption predated Harel's shift by 6 weeks, affecting records from late September. The timestamps displayed impossible values, dates that had not yet occurred, and in one case a negative integer where the hour should have been. I flagged the entries for review and made a note to recommend a full software audit. The first night passed without incident. I kept the radio on low volume and reviewed technical manuals until just after midnight, then turned in. The station was quiet except for the wind and the occasional creak of the structure settling. On the second night, I woke to the alarm panel lighting up all at once. All 6 motion alerts were active simultaneously, each sensor showing identical movement patterns. The locations were separated by miles of pipeline, some to the north, some to the west, one nearly at the end of my patrol zone. I pulled up the thermal overlay and found no corresponding heat signatures. I switched to visual feeds, but the cameras showed only empty enclosures and frost-covered ground. The motion graphs indicated sustained activity, not the brief spikes you would expect from a passing animal or debris blown by wind. I followed protocol and contacted regional dispatch. The radio transmitted, but I received only static in return, a flat hiss with no variation. I tried 3 times, adjusting frequency and gain, with the same result. I switched to my satellite phone. The screen displayed a valid signal, 4 bars, but when I dialed the emergency line, the call would not connect. It rang once, then dropped to silence. I tried twice more. The phone functioned normally in every other respect, showing the correct time, full battery, no error codes. The manual does not address this combination of failures. At 0347, I decided to drive to the nearest triggered location, the western valve house Harrell had mentioned. I took my flashlight, camera, and a handheld radio, though I did not expect the radio to be useful. The drive took 11 minutes. When I arrived, I found the access hatch standing open. The locking mechanism was still engaged, the bolt thrown into place, but the hatch had been opened from the inside. I examined the lock under direct light and found no damage, no tool marks, no sign of forced entry. There were boot prints in the frost leading away from the valve house. They were recent, still sharply defined. I followed them for approximately 30 yards. They led in a direction where the pipeline does not run, toward open country with no structures, no roads, no reason for anyone to walk that way. The prints stopped at a low rise. Beyond that point, the ground showed no disturbance. I documented the prints with my camera, taking multiple photographs from different angles with the flash on. When I reviewed the images on the camera's screen, every photograph showed only unmarked frost. I took additional pictures, adjusting settings and focal length. The results were identical. I returned to the valve house and wrote a detailed description in my notebook, including measurements of the print depth and stride length. I knew the description would be insufficient for any formal report, but it was all I had. I closed the hatch and checked the lock again. It engaged smoothly, as it should. I returned to the station and monitored the system for the remainder of the night. By dawn, all motion alerts had ceased. I drove back to the western valve house in full daylight. The access hatch was closed and locked, showing no indication it had ever been disturbed. My notebook remained on the passenger seat, where I had left it. I opened it to review my notes from the night. The handwriting resembled mine, the same slant and pressure, but the phrasing was not how I write. Certain words were spelled in full, where I would have used abbreviations. The tone was more formal than my usual field notes. I read the entry 3 times and could not recall writing it that way. I completed the remaining audit work early, cycling through each sensor array and relay point, finding nothing else out of specification. I flagged the telemetry inconsistencies as equipment malfunction and recommended Station 7, Delta for full system replacement in my official report. I included no mention of the motion alerts, the open hatch, or the boot prints. I described the corrupted timestamps as a software error and suggested the console be pulled for diagnostic work at the depot. My supervisor accepted the findings without question. 2 days after I submitted the report, I received notice of reassignment to Southern Sector rotations beginning the following month. No explanation was provided, no objection was invited. Station 7. Delta was listed for decommissioning the following spring, though I was told the decision had been made prior to my audit. The equipment logs were archived under standard retention policy, and I was not asked to provide any additional testimony or clarification. Story number 3, ward transfer. I arrived at Clearwater Hills Psychiatric Facility at 200 hours on the 16th of November to cover a double shift for a nurse who had called in sick. It was standard float assignment work through the County Health Services contract. I had covered shifts there 3 times before without incident. The facility housed 42 patients across 3 wings, all minimum security classifications, mostly court-ordered evaluations and short-term stabilization cases. The night supervisor, Karen Moss, met me at the staff entrance and walked me through the evening report. 2 patients were on 15-minute observation checks. One was recovering from a seizure earlier that day. The rest were stable. She mentioned that the East Wing had been quiet all evening, which she said with a particular emphasis I did not understand at the time. She left at 22:30 hours, and I began my first rounds. The East Wing held 9 patients. I moved room to room, checking vitals and documenting behavior in the logbook we kept on a rolling cart. Most were asleep. 2 were reading. 1 asked me for water, which I provided. When I reached the isolation room at the end of the corridor, I found patient 17 sitting upright in bed, facing the wall, whispering in a continuous stream. The sound was low and rapid, almost rhythmic. I opened the door fully, and the whispering stopped immediately. Patient 17 did not turn around. I checked the chart. The patient had been nonverbal for 6 months, according to the intake notes and every subsequent evaluation. I took vitals manually. Pulse and blood pressure were normal. I documented the whispering as a potential change in status and noted the time. The patient remained facing the wall. I finished the round and returned to the nurse's station. At 02:30 hours, I began the second round. When I entered the East Wing corridor, I saw that every patient was standing at their door. All 9 of them. They were facing the same direction, toward the isolation room at the end of the hall. None of them moved when I approached. I called out to the nearest patient, a man in his 50s who had been admitted for evaluation after a depressive episode. He did not respond. I stepped closer and waved my hand in front of his face. He did not blink. His eyes were open and fixed on the far end of the corridor. I moved down the line. Each patient was the same, standing, staring, unresponsive to verbal prompts or light stimulus from my penlight. I documented this in my notepad and returned to the nurse's station to call for security backup. When I lifted the receiver, I heard only static. I tried the intercom system. The same static, dense and unbroken. I took out my cell phone. It showed full signal, 4 bars, but every call I attempted would not complete. The screen would show connecting. And then nothing. I returned to the East Wing. The patients were still standing in the same positions. I walked to the isolation room. The door was open. I had locked it manually after the first round. I always locked the isolation room. The magnetic lock panel on the wall showed a green engaged light, but the door was standing wide open. Patient 17 was not in the room. The bed was made. The walls were covered in handprints. Perfect, overlapping handprints in what looked like some kind of residue, maybe soap or lotion, though there was none in the room. The prints covered every surface. The walls, the ceiling, the floor, even the underside of the bed frame. I stepped inside carefully and saw that all of the handprints were oriented in the same direction. They were all pointing toward the ventilation grate in the corner of the ceiling. I heard movement above me. It came from the ductwork. Multiple sources, shuffling and scraping. I stepped back into the corridor. The sound followed me, traveling through the ceiling panels. I knew the facility blueprints. I had reviewed them during orientation. The ventilation ducts in the East Wing were only 8 inches in diameter. They were not large enough for a person to move through. The sound continued. It moved along the length of the corridor, directly above the standing patients. I made the decision to evacuate. I used the manual override on each door and guided the patients one by one toward the fire exit at the west end of the wing. None of them resisted. None of them spoke. They moved when I directed them, but their eyes stayed fixed on the corridor behind us until we passed through the fire doors. I sealed the doors using the emergency lock bar and kept the patients in the West Wing common area. I tried the phone again. Still static. I tried my cell phone. Same result. I stayed with the patients until the day shift supervisor, a man named Eugene Phelps, arrived at 0600 hours. He came in through the main entrance and found me in the common area. I told him what had happened. He listened without interrupting and then made a call from his office. That call went through. 2 men arrived at 07:15 hours. They were not facility staff. They wore county identification but no uniforms. They asked me to walk them through the east wing. I unlocked the fire doors. The patients' rooms were empty. The isolation room was empty. The handprints were gone. The walls were clean. I showed them my notes. One of them photographed the pages with his phone. The other asked me if I had touched anything in the isolation room. I said I had not entered beyond the threshold. He nodded and made a note on a tablet. I was told to complete an incident report and submit it to the county medical examiner's office, not to facility administration. I wrote the report in the supervisor's office and handed it to one of the men before I left. He said someone would follow up with me. 4 hours later, I received a call from the County Health Services coordinator. She told me the report had been reclassified and that I was being reassigned to outpatient services in a different district, effective immediately. She said it was not punitive. She said it was procedural. I never returned to Clearwater Hills. I heard from another float nurse that patient 17 had been transferred to a state facility under a court order that was sealed. The east wing was closed for structural repairs. When my contract with the county ended 8 months later, the repairs were still listed as ongoing. The incident report I submitted was never returned to me, and I was never contacted for follow-up. The file was archived under a classification I was not permitted to review.